What can Jiu Jitsu teach us about marketing? How can we take our grand openings and events to the next level? Are you familiar with the viral coefficient? We'll unpack all this and more with today's expert guest. Marketing and sales are full of myths, misconceptions, and sometimes flat out lies. Join us as we leave the echo chamber and speak with a Jiu Jitsu world champion about empathy.
Hello, and welcome to the Rethink Marketing Podcast, where we bring some original ideas to modern marketing trends. I'm Paul Frodge, joined by Mr. Marketing, and for today's conversation, the godfather of grand openings, Colin Jeffries.
That's a great alliteration today, Paul. I love it. How are you doing?
Doing well, Colin. Looking forward to today's guest and on season 5, our first one of the year.
Yes, absolutely. So, Paul, today we are joined by Kris Olivo, co-founder of both Helpful Human Franchising and the award-winning agency Almost Magical Marketing. He's a renowned chatbot guru, respected entrepreneur, jiu-jitsu champion, and co-author of the book, The Grand Opening Game Plan. Kris has masterminded hundreds of grand openings, and he's helped thousands of small businesses attract new customers and grow revenue. He believes that knowledge is useless until it's applied. Welcome to the Rethink Marketing Podcast, Kris Olivo. How are you today, Kris?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for having me, guys. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, we're excited to dive into today's conversation.
All right. So, Kris, I'd love to understand how your journey in jiu-jitsu and becoming a world champion shaped your approach to business and leadership.
Oh, for sure. So with jiu-jitsu, it was kind of an escape at first, right? And then it became an obsession over time, right? I grew up breakdancing, and so that kind of lateral movement, kind of just fit my soul, basically. Like once I started doing it, I was like, oh, this is what I should be doing, like athletically, energetically. And so jiu-jitsu, I always tell people, I meet a lot of business people through jiu-jitsu too. There's a lot of parallels between what you deal with on the mats and what you deal with in business, right? In jiu-jitsu, for those of you that don't know, it's a martial art based on grappling mostly, right? And so the whole idea is to control your opponent until you can get positional control and then get them to a point of submission, right? Which is basically them quitting because you would either choke them unconscious or break one of their limbs, right? It's all joint locks and chokes. And so there's not many things in life that are more uncomfortable than somebody choking you or attempting to break your arm, right? And so I always tell people, I'm like, if you can do jiu-jitsu, if you can do a martial art like that, where it's like full contact all the time, it kind of makes everything easier, right? And jiu-jitsu is one of those things where it's like, there's no shortcuts, there's no hacks, there's no tricks, it's a matter of progression, dedication, commitment, failure and failure and failure until you find success, right? And that's one of the things I find most beautiful about it is that the mats make people honest, right? And I think that translates into the business world too, because as entrepreneurs, we're all successful entrepreneurs, we're all used to failure, right? Most people aren't knocking it out of the park first time they try something. And so it takes iterations, it takes a healthy relationship with failure to get better. And that relationship with failure has allowed me to be successful not only in business, but in tournaments, competitions and stuff. And that eventually led me to my world title.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, go ahead, Colin.
I was going to say, I love this idea of learning from failure. And I think one of the really cool things about your book and just your methodology is you're not coming in saying, hey, we'll help you fail and learn and fail and learn. You're saying, hey, we've done this hundreds of times. We've helped thousands of businesses or we've helped thousands of franchisees. Here are the systems that work. And I think about jiu-jitsu, and I know jiu-jitsu doesn't have forms necessarily, but a lot of different martial arts have systems that people learn. And I think about jiu-jitsu and, we're going to practice arm bars. We're going to practice triangle chokes. We're going to practice, pick your move, and you practice it over and over and over and over to deliver muscle memory. So that way, when someone is trying to choke you out, you can escape the choke. Or when somebody is trying to, do an arm bar or what have you, the escape. And it's not you trying to figure it out for the first time on the mat. It's you going through a system and working a process that someone else has developed and refined and perfected and then trained you on. So can you help us unpack that a little bit from just like systems to learning and failing?
Yeah, absolutely. So in jiu-jitsu, you have reliable systems, right? There's certain things that I know they work all the time. Like braking mechanics of an armbar or a footlock. Those are things that are reliable. Sequences, right, to get to those positions, those things can be reliable. And so it's a matter of training your body and your mind and like to feel these systems, right, over time. And so like we have positions in jiu-jitsu, right? There's different types of guard, there's different types of positional controls and stuff like that. And those things are part of the system that you use to get somebody to submit, right? In advertising, it there's parallels there, right? Like when good advertisers split test all the time. Why are we split testing? Well, it's because we have to make constant iterations to improve upon what we would consider failures, right? Because if our ads were super successful and there was nothing to improve, then there would be zero reason to split test, right? And so over time, you figure out things that become reliable, right? And so in advertising, we have that same approach. We split test a lot. We keep track of the things that work. We let go of the things that don't, and jiu-jitsu is the same way, right? Like I'll try a move. Somebody will show me a move. I'm a black belt, so I've been around for quite a bit now. Somebody will show me something and they're like, hey, what do you think about this? Some stuff I'll look at it and I'm like, haven't seen that before. Got to try it. But I have to try it in a real life scenario, not just like, just theoretical. It's the same thing. Somebody could say, hey, look at this ad I made. Is it going to perform? I'm like, could. I've seen ugly ads that make millions of dollars. I've seen pretty ads that don't make anything. And so it's a matter of practice and actually putting it out there and making sure that that feedback loop actually loves you and tells you like, hey, this is working well. Same thing with jiu-jitsu. There's plenty of moves where people show me new guys and I'm like, this one I don't know about. I have to try it. And there's some stuff I can see. I'm like, no, that's not practical. I can tell you right now, you're not going to do that to anybody who's decent at what we're doing, or a resisting opponent. And so I look at markets as resisting opponents, right? Because as a whole, we're not getting up as consumers every day screaming like, oh, please serve me ads, especially in the disruptive advertising field. A lot of our grand openings, we use disruptive advertising because we're breaking into new markets. And so there's not a ton of search volume for a brand or anything like that. And so we have to get in front of people's face. And so I feel like psychologically, we naturally resist ads, right? But we only resist ads that aren't necessarily the most applicable to us, that don't have a lot of value, things like that. And so when it comes to that parallel, they're kind of similar. You know what I'm saying? It's like, well, we got to test it out. We got to make sure it works. If it does work, okay, that's another tool in our toolbox, right? But if it doesn't, we're going to throw it out and move on.
One way that we can kind of circumvent the resisting opponent, I like how you phrase that, from a new customer perspective, is word of mouth. And I know you have this concept of the viral coefficient. So I would say a lot of marketing people, business leaders, we understand word of mouth conceptually. A customer comes in, we make them happy, they leave, hopefully they go tell somebody, but we don't have a system built around that. So unpack what viral coefficient means for us as marketing leaders and how it's different from just word of mouth.
So the viral coefficient is a concept that I got from a book called Contagious that talks about why things spread, right? And it broke down the coefficient they gave was 1.3. If 1.3 people, and obviously, we're not a third of a person, but the numbers 1.3, if every person you share something with shares it with someone else, right? Then you have a built-in virality. Now, the thing that you have to consider is just because a product is good, just because something is good, doesn't mean anyone has any incentive to share it. I always talk to people about this. I'm like, bad reviews come without you asking. Good reviews only come typically with you asking. We're not all natural reviewers. Like, I guarantee you, there's probably a restaurant or something that you bought or something that you really enjoyed, but you didn't just think, oh man, I need to go leave some social proof, like, oh, I'm going to go leave this restaurant a review on Yelp. Like, and so it's one of those things that if businesses want to get more reviews and get more people sharing, right? Because if somebody leaves you a positive review, the likelihood of them sharing it with their friends, right? Because we want to share things. ultimately, because it drives social currency. If I know something you don't know and I share it with you, right, it makes me cooler. I have social currency because I'm putting you onto something, right? And we trust that when it comes to our friends, people that we like. I buy products off of influencers and stuff like that. If I know somebody's really good at something and they say, hey, this product is fantastic, I go and check it out, right? Because I'm shortcutting and mitigating my risk. And that's what we're all looking to do as consumers and people that purchase things. We want to mitigate our risk when it comes to ultimately what we're spending our dollars on. And in order for businesses to mitigate that risk for their potential consumers, they need social proof. They need people not only sharing, but leaving them reviews. And that doesn't come without incentive. There's people that talk about like, oh, if your product is really, really that good, they'll share it. Sure. But that is a rarity when it comes to a lot of things, unless there's some sort of built-in incentive. And sometimes that incentive is just social currency alone. It doesn't happen as often, especially with certain industries, and so it's one of those things that even if the product is good, it doesn't mean that there shouldn't be a incentive to share it, right? Because when you're doing that, then you're asking your customers to take on the work of getting you more customers. And so you're outsourcing your customer acquisition to your actual customer, which is going to decrease how much you spend on ads and SEO, all that stuff, right? And so it's an important concept that I think people don't necessarily think about all the time, and how to implement it systematically. And that's the most important part, is creating a system to where it's easy for your staff to do it. It's easy for your consumer to do it, right? Because if as well as I do, if people have to jump through a bunch of hoops to do something, it's unlikely they're going to do it. If that makes sense.
That definitely makes sense. So you co-authored a book, The Grand Opening Game Plan. Love to hear a transformative success story from that experience and that book writing.
Sure. So the book writing itself, that was a very, very very, very growing experience, because you know a lot of stuff, but organizing it is one of the hardest parts, right? And then not only organizing it, creating something that's very consumable and easy. We spent a lot of time, like I can't tell you how long we spent on just the outline alone, right? And it really came from really looking at, okay, here's all the things that we do. We do this all the time. We know it works. How do we put this in a format that people can consume and make it easy for them to apply these concepts, right? So you have to start thinking in terms of like models and mental models on how to really use this stuff from a non-technical standpoint, because the technical things people can learn, but it's really the underlying concepts that make things work. And so the process was pretty difficult to write a book, but it was very rewarding. We spent, like I mentioned, we spent a lot of time on the outline. And then after the outline, we just kept refining and refining and refining. And then we started actually writing the book once we had the outline. And then from there, it was like first round of edits, like, no, this is too complicated. We have to make it more simple, because I'm a big believer that if you understand something well, you can explain it simply. If you don't, you're going to try to use complexity to try to hide the fact that you actually don't understand it, right? And most people, they don't really want to read stuff that's past like a third grade level. There's a reason why you look at like Alex Hormozy, Russell Brunson, people like that. Their books are very, very easy to understand and consume, because they're written for that exact objective. Now, to give you a success story on these concepts, right? And we do these grand openings all the time. For one of our partners, we're a mandatory vendor, and every location they open up, we're running their grand opening. And we just had one last weekend where our client reached out to us and was like, hey, I literally cannot take any more people for our grand opening. All of our staff is booked. Please turn off the ads. Like, I don't want to turn people away and make them upset. And so we blew out their entire opening, and they were pretty well staffed compared to a lot of other franchises out the gate. And that was just the same concepts that we just keep applying. Now, we always try to improve on those concepts. So I don't know, 5 years from now, I might have more to add to that book, but the underlying core concepts are the same. And that's what we're applying for ourselves. And so our goal with that book was to just give people some insight in how we're doing things, because you don't necessarily need to do things with us. But, if we can help you along the way, that's fantastic.
Kris, what are a couple of things that you would say a lot of small businesses get wrong about grand openings? And I'll even expand that and say event marketing in general, because this applies beyond just a grand opening. It applies to, I think about, sure, ribbon cuttings, but anniversaries and open houses and all sorts of different events. What do most business owners get wrong about that?
I see a couple things. One, a little short-sightedness on the advertising. Some people don't want to start early, right? Early, kind of the earlier you start, most of the time the better. Now, I'm not saying start advertising a year in advance before you're going to do your launch, because that can be pretty expensive, especially for a small business. But I don't recommend any business do their grand opening without 30 days of advertising. You want to give people time and notice to commit to whatever it is that you're trying to get them to go to, right? That window also gives you time to fix things, right? Because we have game plans. So it's like, I know for a specific grand opening, we're going to run this copy, we're going to run this creative, this is where we're sending them to, right? Here's a follow-up on like the whole system. But different markets are different, right? So what works in Orlando doesn't necessarily work in Birmingham, Alabama, even though the business might be the exact same business, right? We work with a lot of franchises. And so we see that play out. And so when you have a little bit of a longer window, you can afford more split tests and more improvements if your plan A doesn't necessarily pan out the way it's supposed to. So that's the thing, people rushing and not wanting to spend the money on getting the word out. You know, if you're opening up a new business, no one knows who you are. You can tell your friends and family, but I mean, how much is your reach on social media, right? When it comes to people that you don't know, most of us don't have tremendous reach on our accounts organically. So you're going to have to pay to get in front of eyeballs, right? And so there's that. I think having a good grand opening offer is really, really important too, especially if your product is like a commodity and people can go a bunch of different places. It doesn't matter that you have balloons and a ribbon cutting. Sure, that's great, but that's for you. That's not really for anybody else, right? And so I think having something to where you can mitigate the risk for somebody coming in and also making it exciting. We try to make our grand openings like it's almost like a party, like we're celebrating. You know, you're going to get a lot of value for trying us out. We're gonna we're gonna do our best to make everything exciting, and give you something to look forward to that weekend or when however long that event is. So I think those are some things that are really really important. We don't get a lot of pushback on it because most of the time people are like, "Hey, you've already done this hundreds of times. We're going to trust you." But occasionally there might be somebody that's like, "Oh no, I don't think I want to do that," and then they deviate from the plan. At that point, everything is unpredictable.
I think about a new business, and there are a host of challenges. One of which is if you don't already have great loyal customers, sometimes it can be difficult to go out and talk to loyal customers because you don't have them yet. How do you recommend that new businesses go about developing a really compelling offer for their grand opening or for their event?
It's a matter of knowing the customers you're trying to attract and what's important to them, right? Whether they're driven by X or Y, right? And so every business, no matter what kind of business you are, should be digging deep into who are the people that they serve and what do they care about, right? And then there's also a lot of research you can do, because chances are if you're starting a business, you're not reinventing, like you're not creating something brand new, right? Most businesses are already out there. There's few of us that are carving out entire new industries, right? And so because of that, you can study how the market has responded before, right? There's tools that you can use to look at other advertising that like companies are using, especially if there's like giants in your area. Now, some of those guys just have a lot of brand, and that's something that's hard to overcome. But when you're smaller, you're more nimble, right? And so you can kind of look at, okay, these are things that other people have done that seem to have worked for them. You can check out ads, see what people are commenting on, whether people are responding to it a lot, right? And so all that stuff is out there. It's just a matter of going to look at it. So when you're just getting started, the best thing you can do is find out what's already working for my market and how do I improve on it in a way that these other guys aren't doing, right? One of the things that I like doing is say somebody has a really good offer. I see hundreds of comments on it, whatever, for whatever kind of business it is. Well, we'll look at that offer and we'll say, how do we improve this? What's something else that they want? What's the next step that this company's charging for? Let's give it away for free, right? But in order to do that, you also have to know the economics of your business, right? It's hard to know that at first when you're first starting out, but knowing how long a customer might come back on average, like you have to look at those industry averages to understand like, okay, what's the point to where I need to like stop before I'm losing money versus, right, like creating something that has good value, but also is in line with my LTV, which is like my lifetime value of my customers. So I know if I bring in a certain customer and on average the industry's LTV for a good product is say 6 months or 10 services or whatever it is, then I can calculate, okay, well, that means that this person is worth this much to my business. And so I'm okay losing some on the front end as long as the service is good. You're going to make your money on the back end. So business owners, and I know it's hard to play the long game when you're short in the game itself, right? But you have to think long term because nobody short-sighted has ever really won anything. So that's kind of my thought process on that.
So, Kris, what are some of the industries or businesses that are having the most success with grand openings? And then talk a little bit about some of the pitfalls that some are experiencing during grand openings and how they rebound.
So we do a lot of brick and mortar businesses. So I would say stuff like that where you can actually have an event based around your business and have a place for people to go to. Are some of the easier ones to do because it's physical, it's tangible, people can feel it. Doing launches online, like a grand opening online business, that's a little different because it's not like people are waiting to enter all the time. Like they're not seeing the construction stuff like that, and so we work with a lot of service-based businesses, beauty-based businesses, stuff like that. I mean, we've worked with massage places, chiropractors, PTs, salons, things like that. And so that's kind of our bread and butter because we understand those customers really, really well. For me, it's a matter of even if it's online, it's like, okay, who is my customer? What can I give away? Right? What can I give away to mitigate the risk, get them to come in, try it, get them to feel that experience, right? Because it's a little different feeling and experience online versus in person, right? Like online, it's not immediate, right? Like, sure, you could launch a live Zoom or whatever, but like I could have a grand opening. We're building a software platform right now. I could have a grand opening for our software platform, which is basically like a beta, right? But there's no like control I have over when people are using it and how they're using it or like the experience that they're feeling. Like I have control over the UI and user experience, sure, but like it's not the same. So like if I do a beta and I invite you guys to the beta, there's no like curated environment that like I know you're going to be using it during this time. Whereas a grand opening in a physical business, like it's a window, people are physically coming, right? So if I share my beta with you, I have no guarantee you're going to use it within the time frame that I want to, right? If I'm just launching the software to the public. And so with an actual physical brick and mortar business, you can pump traffic into one time and one event using scarcity and stuff like that and exclusivity. So that way you get a flux of people. And then when those events go well, people share them.
I do want to circle up on something that you just said because I think it's important to maybe delineate between a one-time event and maybe a growth initiative that takes place across channels and over a long period of time. And I think we talked about this a little bit earlier, but a grand opening is not a one and done single event. It's a longitudinal experience that takes place over time where you're using different channels. You're using paid social, you're using PPC, you're using pre-roll, you're doing a lot of different things to build excitement and awareness in addition to the physical stuff that you're doing, putting out banners and balloons and those types of things. So can you unpack a little bit for us, Kris, about the importance of understanding, hey, this is a multi-channel endeavor that's taking place over time. You can't just hang your shingle up, so to speak, and expect people to show up for a great grand opening, a one-time event.
No, yeah. And so it's the way I look at grand openings, I look at them like a land grab. right? We have a shot at grabbing a lot of customers in a single instance, right? Now, the more we do that, the better we see their next 6 months, right? The better we see their advertising, stuff like that. And so we are definitely multi-channel. Whenever we start doing this, we'll start showing up in different places, right? Because as humans, we need to be reminded of stuff. Our attention span has only gotten shorter over the years, right? I talk about this in our book, that it's like basically like the attention span of a goldfish. There's a reason why short form content is very popular. The reason why TikTok took off, because it's very fast, easy to consume. YouTube has shorts, Instagram has stories and reels, and like everybody is catering to the attention span that we basically destroyed over time, right? Because there's so many things competing for our attention. It's very important to show up. You can't just assume, oh, if I show up one time, I show them a flyer, this person's going to stop what they're doing and they're going to commit to coming in. They don't need you. You need them, right? And so that's kind of our approach when it comes to it. So we'll do a lot of like remarketing. We'll sign people up for an extra value on like a early access list kind of deal. We'll message them, we'll text them, we'll email them, stuff like that to remind them. And then we just talk about what the experience is going to be like, so they know what they're getting into, right? Ultimately. So we're like, oh, we're so excited to have you. Just a friendly reminder. We're going to have this, and that. And then sometimes we'll throw in extra things to make things excited. Like we work with a lot of kid businesses. So we'll have Spider-Man show up, or Elsa, right? From Frozen, or we'll have face painters, because like people like new stuff. So even if you sell the same thing that somebody else does, just because you're new, sometimes people want to try it. They'll be like, oh, this new Italian place opened up, blah, 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 right? And so you have an opportunity when you're breaking into a market for people to want to just try you just because you're new, right? Because we all have shiny object syndrome. Basically, you might have an Italian place you love, but if a new one opens up, you might be like, let me go try this place out, right? Especially if somebody told you that it's going to be good, or you saw like a video of them hand making their pasta. Like, we hand make our pasta here. We can't wait to have you for our grand opening. When you come in, your appetizers on us, right? Kind of deal, right? And so you offer incentives, you get people excited, you show them the experience, right? And what to anticipate, and then you have to deliver, because it's one of those things. It's a double-edged sword. If their first impression with you is trash and you're not ready for it, right? Then that's not going to go well. Now you have to overcome negative press, basically. Right. And so it's a matter of getting people really, really excited about the thing, but then making sure that you actually deliver on every single promise that you have.
It really intrigues me, Kris, about this whole grand opening. My career started in radio, and I remember the days of free pizza and gift cards and spinning the wheel. And it really is interesting to see how that's transformed into some of the things that you're doing. And people are actually showing up, even though they have busy schedules. If you offer them something that is an interest to them, how something can be changed from back in the day of radio remotes to what you're doing today.
Yeah, no, it is pretty crazy when you think about the process of it. Like, this person is minding their business, they're scrolling, consuming their content, they see an ad, right? The ad the first time, oh, that's interesting, right? They see it again, like, oh, there goes again. Oh, what's this brand I keep hearing about, right? And then they start getting excited, they click on it, they're like, okay, then they give you their information. And then they literally physically have to drive there and show up and remember, right? Like, you're asking someone to do a lot, and you're asking them to also give you money on top of that. Like, I don't know about you guys, but like, I don't know. People are busy, right? Like, I'm pretty busy. I'm very like meticulous about my commitments and stuff like that. And so, because you're asking for a lot, you also have to give a lot, right? And if you're not ready to give, then, I don't know what to tell you at that point. Like, you might have to change your mindset about what you're doing, because you're not the only option. There's certain industries that are, they're monopolies. Like, I don't have a choice over my energy company, really. I don't have a choice over certain things. But when it comes to Italian food, like, I got a million choices, right? So why you? Why am I going to stop what I'm doing, come into your place of business, and actually try you, right? So you got to make it good. You got to make it for them.
Kris, to validate everything that you have been saying the last 15 minutes or 20 minutes or so, there was a Korean place, I think Korean barbecue place that opened, 2 miles probably from my house. I love food and I particularly enjoy a good Korean dish. So they opened and I was excited to go check it out. But a couple of my neighbors who happen to be Korean went and tried it out and they came back and they said the food was okay. The service was really slow. The wait staff didn't really know what they were doing. We didn't really have a good experience. So maybe wait a month or two, let them hire on the right people, let them train their staff better, and then maybe go check it out. Well, a couple of months went by. I had in the back of my head, oh yeah, I need to go try that Korean place. Well, then I went on Google Maps or Google My Business to look at, have the reviews improved? Have they gotten better? They had gotten worse. I still haven't gone and tried the place, and it's been open for probably 3 or 4 years. And exactly what you're saying resonates with me because of that, because they didn't have a great grand opening event. I probably would have gone again. I really like that type of food, but they didn't have anything special. And I still wanted to go check it out. I wanted to spend money. I wanted to enjoy their fare, but they didn't deliver when my friends went and checked it out. And so then they came back and we talked a little bit about the viral coefficient, and they told me, hey, don't waste your time. So then I didn't. And I just think about how many businesses either have a grand opening that they flub, or they don't even have a grand opening, but they've been running for a couple of years and they're just not delivering on customer expectations. So, again, just to say what you have said definitely plays out in my experience, and it's really striking a chord.
Yeah, I think it's so relatable because we're all looking for the same thing. We're all looking for this to prove to me that it's the right thing for me, right? Because ultimately, I don't want to take the risk. I don't want to waste my time. I don't want to waste my money. I don't want to just have a bad experience. And I think what owners can do to kind of, because grand openings are hectic, right? Especially when you're hiring a new staff, you don't know them that well. Everybody's getting to know each other. You don't know what kinks you're going to run into, right? And so what some of our owners do are soft openings where they'll operate they're not advertising a ton. They're taking a small amount of customers, for a week, 2 weeks, whatever, feeling the kinks out. And then once they've got their processes down and they discover the problems, because you don't know the problems that you don't know you're going to have, right? You can't just see the future. And so some of them will do that. We won't advertise the soft openings because we don't want the market to be splitting attention. But if a customer happens to walk by, come in, whatever, that's practice for them, right? And they're not over promising because there's no ad that promised all this magic and glamour and stuff like that, right? So the person doesn't really know what they're getting into. And so that's an opportunity to kind of smooth out the operations. I think one of the best examples of this too is you could also have a pre-opening. A pre-opening is not a soft opening. You're not taking customers, but you're pretending, right? Nobody wants to do this because it seems silly, but I'll tell you who's the best example of doing this ever: McDonald's. I don't know if you've ever watched the Founder movie, but there's a scene, and I talk about this in the book too. There's a scene where they're the McDonald's brothers are trying to fix their speedy system, right? Is what it was called back then. So they were trying to create a seamless experience to where the moment somebody paid, about 30 seconds later, they were getting their food. That was not normal. There was no fast food back then, right? And so they took their staff out to a tennis court and they paid them for the day. They chalked up the tennis court with their food stations, right? And they literally made everybody pretend they were making fries, pretend they were flipping the burgers, pretend they were putting the stuff on there, right? And then they sat back and they watched. And they're like, oh, look it, the fry guy just ran into the hamburger guy. No, we got to move the fry machine so they don't run into each other. And they kept doing that until it just worked, right? And so you have to figure out what those kinks are, because your business is a machine. And if all the gears need to turn one way and you have some friction and a gear turning the wrong way, it's going to stop everything else and it ruins kind of the experience, right? You mentioned everybody was slow. Why were they slow? They didn't have to be slow. Could there be a Korean barbecue model that's not slow that works well? Okay, well, sure, there can. Well, all right. Well, if it's possible, it's just a matter of us being a little bit more creative in how we get to that. And you're not going to know until you try. And so I tell people, I'm like, if you can do that, if you can practice with your staff, right? If you can create a system prior, then it's not up to chance, right? So I always tell people, I'm like, what is the first thing that someone says to your customers when they walk in the door? Do they say the same thing every time? Do they ask the same questions? What happens after? Yes. Where's your upsell at? When do you plan on introducing this? What do you say to them here? What happens after that when they sit down? What do you do? Do you just like let them wait? Or do you give them a water? Do you give them something for them to like consume kind of deal? And so it's like you can think about, you have to put yourself in the customer's shoes and think, okay, what would be the perfect experience for me if I was visiting this place, right? Okay, and then how do I create that? McDonald's fucking killed it doing that. That's why they're McDonald's, because they made something that was so seamless that it was just they carved out that industry and they created that. Like, it's actually pretty beautiful when you think about it. I don't eat McDonald's or anything like that, but the way that they operate and their systems are pretty damn good. That's why they can hire anybody off the street, because they've got their processes dialed in. I actually worked for McDonald's. It was my first job, and yeah, it's hard work, but it's easy to work there, right? Because you don't need any training. They have everything systemized. So I think more people should do that.
I love exactly what you're saying. And Kris, the way that you're talking sounds like you've done some human-centered design or design thinking, which is basically start with empathy. And you talk about being empathetic to, I mean, with the McDonald's example, they're empathetic to the employees. Hey, we have to make a system that is foolproof, that people can learn, that high schoolers can learn instantaneously and execute against. And then talking about customer experience, having empathy for, I think you said, if I was that person, what would I want? Or what would my perfect experience be? That's just key. I'd like to switch gears a little bit because I know you're also a chatbot expert. So we've talked about experience and driving people to a physical location. Let's swing the pendulum the other way and talk about chatbots. What do people mostly get wrong about chatbots? And I'll sort of make this a two-part question. So, how are we thinking about chatbots wrong? And then how do we make a more human-centric experience with chatbots? A lot of my experience with organizations is they had a chatbot so they don't have to have another receptionist or hire another person to answer phones or fill in the blank. It's a labor savings cost. It's not a customer experience investment. So I guess I set the question up a lot, but feel free to dive in.
Sure, no, for sure. So I think with chatbots, it's a matter of like the experience, right? And helping people get to the point very, very fast, right? Nobody wants to waste their time. And so where I see some people do wrong, and this has changed, this industry has changed rapidly over the last year or two because now we have open AI bots and all this stuff. And so it's significantly better because like we're all in love with ChatGPT. That's like a chatbot. It's just super, super advanced, right? And so people are using they're training them differently now, right? Before there was no training them. It was just here's all the conditional logic. Here are the prompts. Here are what you ask. Here are the potential responses, right? And so when we were doing that, and we leverage them a lot still for advertising because it creates something that's more inbound, right? Now you're messaging me, right? And that gives me a little bit easier access to you as opposed to like trying to get you to fill out a form, stuff like that. And so we test out the strategy back and forth. We use forms too. It just depends on kind of cost, budget, advertising, stuff like that. But the core of how we would build them we would look at like, what would I want, right? How do I want this? I'm a consumer. I don't like talking to robots. I don't like having to go through this and that and that and that and that. And so we would try to get to the point really, really fast and give them a little bit of personality, right? Having a little bit of personality will kind of throw you off a little bit to where you're like, huh, this is interesting. Like, and so people would find a little novelty in it. We used to build like after like, say you entered a sequence, right? We would even do stuff like, hey, here are some other options that you can use if you want to check us out, right? And like some of the stuff we would do would be like there'd be like little games, or like things to entertain people. And we would have people just kind of clicking through it, just exploring it, right? And so we changed the experience a little bit by making it a little bit more fun to use, but also helping them get to the point really, really quickly, right? And then we built in a lot of safeguards and stuff like that to where we always had people monitoring them to make sure that like the moment somebody asks for a human, it's like, no, we're jumping in right now. It's not like, oh, we're going to get back to you in 24 hours. It's like, no, we're going to get to the point now, because we're all dealing with that. You got to call your phone company. You got to go through all these prompts and stuff like that. And it's super annoying. I don't know how many people call. I don't know how many people are like me and then call and then end up just hitting zero a bunch of times to like try to get to the point. Right. And so get to the point, create an experience that's actually good, give people the information they're looking for fast, right? And then also have people ready to jump in, because some people just want to talk to somebody, right? And so I think those things help make the technology easier to use. But like I said, it's changed a lot now. Now you can't even tell that you're talking to a chatbot sometimes, like with all these open AI bots, which I think is pretty cool. Because it's what the market wanted already. Like we want simplicity, ease of use, and the reason we wanted a human is because we think we can get better information from them, right? But these open AI bots are, I don't know, they're pretty damn good to where I don't mind when I'm talking to one if it's giving me exactly what I need, and it's not forcing me to go through prompts. If I can just type the question in plain language, here's what I need, blah, 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 right? And I don't have to click, 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 click. Did you mean this? Like, no, I already said what I meant, right? When you're talking to a human, you can do that. With these open AI bots now, you can do that. So it's improved a lot. It's pretty exciting.
Yeah, Kris, what frustrates me as a consumer is when the chatbot just becomes an FAQ, and like you're saying, the prompts, and you're not getting what you want. I was online last night ordering my son a new pair of basketball shoes, and I had a question, and I was chatting. I was getting frustrated, right? So that experience that the customer is receiving says a lot. So you want to meet the customer where they're at, whether it be chat, phone, forms, whatever it is. But what is your experience with these chatbots when educating clients and looking at the strategy behind those when prompting people on not being an FAQ? How do clients relate to that when you're having those conversations?
So it's a matter of training, right? Like you have to train your bots in the same way you would train a human. Like, hey, here are all the potential things people could ask you. Here's how we respond to them, kind of deal, right? And so you have to dig into all the potentials, right? And then you also have to make it to where I think it's more abstract, right? Because it can be annoying to go through prompt after prompt, and so different people set it up differently. I play with them now to where like one of the softwares we use, my buddy owns, and his customer support is half chatbots and then half real people. I know that, right? But I'll ask his bot a question. I'm like, hey, here's my question. I'm not sure about this. And it'll be like, oh, okay, cool. It'll be like, oh, okay, totally. Yeah, here's what you do, you know? And it's like, it gives me a response just like a human would. It's not asking me like, oh, did you mean this question mark with like a prompt. It just responds to me just in the same way that a human would. And so I think the best thing you can do is spend time on training them, um, and making sure you're setting them up to where they can handle the abstracts, because there's typos, people will use different words for different stuff, right? And so it's a matter of like kind of understanding like and doing the work on prior to save you work later, right? That's going to cut down on the amount of humans that you need to actually operate. And so with his bots, when I use them, most of the time I get the exact answer that I'm looking for. I'll ask it a technical question like, hey, I'm struggling with this integration. Like, can you help me out with this? And it's like, oh, did you try this? And I'm like, no, I didn't. Or yes, I did. And it's like, oh, okay, if you tried that and that didn't work, it's probably more than likely this. But here, let me ping somebody and get them to help you. Do you want to do like a Zoom call or something? And it'll ask me like, and it's literally like I'm talking to just a regular person. And so I think that makes it a lot less frustrating because we're getting the answers we want quickly. And so you have to simulate natural human conversation. So
I like it.
Go ahead, Paul.
No, what I was going to say is appreciate everything that we've talked about today, from martial arts to looking at unpacking grand openings to McDonald's and the conversation there, all the way down to chatbots. So, Kris, we really appreciate your time today.
Of course. Thank you so much. I appreciate you guys. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, Kris. Great conversation, like Paul said. We are the Rethink Marketing Podcast, so we like to ask each guest, Kris, what is one thing that you are rethinking? It could be personal or professional.
One thing that I'm rethinking is the way that we gather social proof and testimonials as entrepreneurs, right? And as people with personal brands. So I thought about this problem for a while, and I realized there's no place for realtors, for loan officers, for entrepreneurs, for personal brands to store all their testimonials. And we're all doing the same thing where we're screenshotting what people say that's nice about us. We're trying to organize it in a way and get rid of this chaos and put it on our landing pages. So that way we can help and serve more people, right? To help mitigate that risk. And so I've been rethinking that problem and how we do things. And that's led me to create a software platform that we can give and share endorsements and testimonials for people with personal brands. Businesses have Google reviews. People don't have anything. And so the platform's called Endorse Me. We haven't launched yet. We're still building. We've been building it for the last 7 months. But we're accepting people to sign up to be beta testers. It's going to be free to use. And it's really us solving our own problem, which we think a lot of other people have. So that's what I'm rethinking right now.
Very cool. Kris, if people want to follow up with you, maybe hear more about Endorse Me or Almost Magical Marketing, how can they do that?
Sure. You can find me on pretty much any platform at the Kris Olivo. That's Kris with a K, Kris Olivo. So if you check this out, you want to hit me up on Instagram or Facebook, you can find me there. You can also go to our website if you're looking for professional help, almostmagicalmarketing.com or almostmagical.com, and then hit us up there. It'll get to me. I'll see it.
Well, I know a lot of people that need some professional help, Kris, so I appreciate that.
Of course.
Is there anything that we didn't touch on today that you wanted to cover?
Be relentless. Don't be afraid of failure. That's it. Let's go out there and be our best selves. And we can only do that by having the courage to be relentless and embrace failure. So.
Excellent. Well, Kris, we really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for, making some time to talk to us, and really value your insight and everything. This has been a great conversation.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me, guys. And thank you for anybody who's listening to this. I hope you guys have a great day.
Appreciate it, Kris.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If people want to connect with us, where should they go, Paul?
RethinkMarketingPodcast.com, Colin. What can listeners do to help us in return for the sage marketing wisdom and our pithy humor?
They can help us by leaving a review on their favorite platform or sharing this episode with a fellow marketer to help them cut through the clutter.
Well, until next time, keep rethinking those common assumptions.